Today I'm going to talk about the cheapest books in the shop here. 5 books, by way of example, for $50 each. Now this is not a sales pitch. I don't make much money on the lower end of the antiquarian spectrum. And if you want any of these books, all the proceeds I will be happy to donate to the Booksellers Benevolent Fund of the ABAA, which helps booksellers in times of need, and there are many booksellers suffering during the current pandemic. One of the reasons why I wanted to talk about inexpensive books is to dispel with this notion that book selling is for rich people. I can imagine beginning collectors can find the entire antiquarian world sometimes rather intimidating. And on some other videos I've shown some quite expensive material. And certainly in the antiquarian trade, you can find extraordinary rarities selling at astronomical sums of money. But you can find very interesting books at modest cost as well. And these are great introductions to book collecting. You can learn a lot, and they are indeed windows to history, literature, art, you name it. So I'm going to talk about 5 books, $50 each. The first book. This is an 18th century French voyage book. There were in the 18th century lots of encyclopedic type texts for voyages. This is one of them by Jean-François de la Harpe. This is only the 4th volume of a larger set, which is probably why it's so inexpensive. But it is an interesting volume nevertheless. It is a volume on India, and it has some wonderful engravings. Here's one of the burning of the dead. I don't know if you consider the burning of the dead wonderful, but it is a book, as I said, published in 1780. One of the things that makes this particular volume quite remarkable is it is inscribed by Henry W. Livingston. Now, don't freak out like you forgot everything from American History 101. That is not a household name. But Henry Livingston was a representative from the state of New York. He was a clerk for Alexander Hamilton. And between 1792 and 1794, he was the personal secretary of Gouverneur Morris. Gouverneur Morris was one of the founding fathers, the penman of the Constitution. He wrote, or at least he improved the preamble, "We the people" of the United States. So for only $50, not only are you getting an interesting 18th century book that gives insight into the perception of India and Europe during the period, but you are getting a copy signed by somebody very close to the inner circle of the founding fathers themselves. So, book number 1. Book number 2, a little one. This is the sayings, the memorable sayings in 9 books of Valerius Maximus. Those were short stories during the Roman period, and a great classic that's been reprinted many times. What is nice about this book is it is published in Amsterdam in 1650 by the Elsevier publishing family. The House of Elsevier was one of the most famous 17th century Dutch publishing houses. They were particularly renowned for making small books. They did other wonderful things, I think, like printing one of Galileo's last works, The Two Sciences, when the Inquisition forbade its printing. But as I said, they were known for these small works, what booksellers, at least in this size, like to call 64mo. That relates to the way the pages are folded from a large sheet of paper in the printing process. It's kind of remarkable, actually, that they could make books during this period in this size. There was a long tradition from Aldus Manutius until then of printing small format books that were inexpensive for students. But it is a masterpiece of typography to fit all of these tiny letters, 100,000 words, into a small book like this. I can't even fit one load of groceries into my New York refrigerator, so I'm always amazed when they can accomplish something in the 17th century like this. It is bound as well in an English 17th century binding of the period, which gives some insight to the trade between Amsterdam and England, as well as the larger trade of the Anglo-continental book trade. So for only $50, you get a little gem of 17th century printing by one of the most famous houses, and you can certainly learn a lot about paper, economical printing of the period, and the book trade. Book number 3 for $50, Snarleyow. Snarleyow was originally called The Dog Fiend. I'm sold right there. Any book that's called The Dog Fiend is close to my heart. It is a novel by Captain Marryat. I don't know if people still read Captain Marryat, but they should. He had a life worthy as a Royal Navy man of a novel himself. This was published in 1897. The book itself is a historical tale that takes place in the late 17th century, searching for smugglers in the English Channel, so a real adventure story. And Snarleyow is indeed the dog. So one of the things I love about this book is the fabulous 19th century publisher's binding. It is stamped with a beautiful 17th century stylized galleon with seashells and parrots above it. And these magnificent end papers, Art Nouveau end papers of a swirling peacock in yellow. The book and the end papers were designed by an American book designer named A.A. Turbane. He went to England to work for the Macmillan Company, and he produced some really splendid volumes. These end papers were probably made for the works of Thomas Love Peacock, and they made their way into this book as well. But they are some of the most splendid examples of end papers during the Art Nouveau period by an important American designer. And you get a fabulous copy of this interesting tale for only $50. So you can learn a lot about publisher bindings. And Captain Marryat, please bring him back. Book number 4 for $50. Let's see what we have here. Gotta open it the right way. There we go. This is Travels Before the Flood, printed in 1797, an Oriental record of men and manners in the antediluvian world. The antediluvian period was that period after the fall of man and creation through the first chapters of Exodus up until the Great Flood. So if you've ever wondered what happened in between the period of Adam and the Great Flood, this is the book for you. This is a particularly interesting book. It was printed, it says, London printed, but in Carlisle, which is in Pennsylvania, in 1797. So we have an 18th century American imprint, and it's quite interesting. It's a conversation between the Caliph of Baghdad and his court. So it fits the genre of a lot of 18th century Orientalism and Romanticism of the wisdom of the Orient. It is quite a rare book with very few known copies. Unfortunately, it's inexpensive because even though it's 2 volumes in one, it is missing the last few pages here, probably 4 or 5 pages towards the end. In the antiquarian world, something being incomplete is often a fatal flaw in terms of value. I don't like to take that extreme approach. I think incomplete books actually can be wonderful. These are books that have traveled the centuries sometimes. So I'm not too hard on appreciating a book just because it is missing a few pages. what I like about this book is it is bound in the early boards as well, but it is also something people call a Franken book because it has been repaired at a very early date with these very heavy stitches to the binding. So they may look clumsy to some people, at least if you're in book conservation today, but they are quite charming for the period. Many times it was an art practiced by women to repair books even. So you get a fine, very rare 18th century American imprint on a fabulous Oriental subject in an interesting binding for only $50. And finally, here is a 17th century copy of the Aeneid by Virgil, printed in Paris in 1664. It has a beautiful engraved title page of the Trials of Hercules here. The Aeneid tells, of course, it is one of the great epic stories, the travels of the Trojan Aeneas on to Rome. It's a foundational work for the history of Rome. This particular copy has some really fabulous engravings throughout it. It doesn't say who the engraver is, but they're such high quality, it's certainly worthy of investigation. The reason the book is inexpensive is it is only volume 1 of 2 volumes. So that is a very serious flaw to be so incomplete. But you do have, like I said, these wonderful engravings and the Aeneid in an early French translation. Here is the engraving of the Cyclops. So when Aeneas escapes the Cyclops, just a fabulous example of 17th century French engraving. And as I said, for $50 you get 1 eye, for $100 you get 2. So that is the final book for $50. So as I said, there are some very interesting works you can buy for modest prices, and you can learn a lot from each individual work, whether it's the bindings, the imprint, the provenance, the history of the work. So I encourage people to go out, start book collecting, and I hope you subscribe. And if you're interested in any of these books, of course, send me an email, put it in the comment. I can only do it, first come, first serve. But I look forward to more videos and explaining some more things about the antiquarian book trade.